Google search Cracku free cat mock. Click on the first link. You can attempt a free mock test which was attempted by 30,000 cat aspirants in the actual exam format. After completing the test, you get detailed solutions, analysis and percentile along with your scorecard to gauge your All India performance. Click on the solution to get video solutions from our expert faculty.
Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular reading comprehension passage, we have the following passage. The first paragraph is, in 2006, the Met Art Museum in the US agreed to return the Euphrates crater, a masterpiece Greek urn that had been a museum draw since 1972. In 2007, the Getty Art Museum in the US agreed to return 40 objects to Italy, including a marble Aphrodite in the midst of looting scandals. And in December, Sotheby's and a private owner agreed to return an ancient Khmer statue of a warrior pulled from auction 2 years before to Cambodia. So here we have 3 examples of antiques being returned to countries. These are all just examples of the same thing, same type of return, where a particular antique, instead of being displayed in a museum, is being returned to the home country as such. So let's take a look at the next paragraph. Cultural property or patrimony laws limit the transfer of cultural property outside the source country's territory, including outright export prohibitions and national ownership laws. Most art historians, archaeologists, museum officials and policymakers portray cultural property laws in general as invaluable tools for counteracting the ugly legacy of Western cultural imperialism. So what is cultural patrimony? These are essentially laws preventing the export or movement of cultural property outside a home country. It means that there is national ownership, so all cultural property of a country belongs to the nation as such, and nobody can buy it and take it outside the country. For example, even in India, the ancient statues of India cannot be essentially exported out of India. They are the property of India as such. So these are the cultural patrimony laws. So these are laws that prohibit the export or movement of cultural property outside the country. Now, why are these laws there? So many people, the archaeologists, historians, museum officials, say that these are good laws. And why do they say these are good laws? Because these laws prevent the kind of looting that was seen in the Western cultural imperialism. So basically, there was Western cultural imperialism where you have statues, antiques, cultural property was looted by these guys, and to prevent that kind of looting, these laws are necessary. So these laws were deemed necessary to prevent looting. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. During the late 19th and early 20th century, an era former Met director Thomas Hoving called the Age of Piracy, American and European art museums acquired antiquities by hook or by crook, from grave robbers or souvenir collectors, bounty from digs and ancient sites in impoverished but art-rich source countries. Patrimony laws were intended to protect future archaeological discoveries against Western imperialist design. So as I mentioned over here, there was an age of piracy when many Western museums essentially stole antiquities, stole cultural property, and these laws, patrimony laws were essentially acted to stop that. I surveyed 90 countries with one or more archaeological sites on the UNESCO World Heritage Site list, and my study shows that in most cases, the number of discovered sites diminishes sharply after a country passes a cultural property law. There are 222 archaeological sites listed for those 90 countries. When you look into history of the sites, you see that all but 21 were discovered before the passage of the cultural property laws. So what is the point being made over here? So the author says I looked at 90 countries, okay? And each of these countries has some version of cultural property law, and of these there were total of 222 archaeological sites. Of these 222 archaeological sites, 21 were discovered after the passing of the cultural property law and 201 were there before passing the cultural patrimony law, and this is after cultural patrimony. So what is the point being made over here? That before the laws were there were a lot of sites being discovered. After the laws came into being, very few sites were discovered. Most of the sites that were discovered were in fact discovered before the patrimony laws came into place. So this is a claim made by the author. Strict cultural patrimony laws are popular in most countries, but the downside may be that they reduce incentives for foreign governments, non-governmental organizations and educational institutions to invest in overseas exploration, because their efforts will not necessarily be rewarded by opportunities to hold, display and study what is uncovered. To the extent that source countries can fund their own archaeological projects, artifacts and sites may still be discovered. The survey has far-reaching implications. It suggests that source countries, particularly in the developing world, should narrow their cultural property laws so that they can reap the benefits of new archaeological discoveries, which typically increase tourism and enhance cultural pride. This does not mean these nations should abolish restrictions on foreign excavation and foreign claims to artifacts. So what is the author saying? So what the author is saying is that when you have strict cultural property laws, what happens? There is no incentive for foreign organizations to dig, to find or discover these archaeological sites. So once you remove the incentive, there are very few people who are actually doing these archaeological discoveries. If the source country is a rich country, that is fine. The source country itself can fund those kind of discoveries. But if it's a poor country, with a lot of archaeological sites, then what should it do? It should actually narrow the cultural property laws so as to allow some amount of essentially some right to those foreign guys. So they are not saying that you should remove all the rights. He is not saying that remove all rights. He is just saying like narrow the cultural property laws. So what exactly he is saying? So when currently now you are not allowing them to even hold or display the particular item or study it also. So give some kind of leeway. Tell them that okay, you can hold it for a few years. You can use it to study it for a few years. You are not like leaving the claim on that particular antique or cultural property, but you are giving them some incentive so that these guys will actually come and dig in your place. They have to actually fund those digging. No, why would they do that if like whatever they discover is immediately taken out of their hands? They will not do that. So basically the author is saying that give them something, give them some leeway that okay, you hold it for some time, you can display it for some time, you can study it for some time. If you give some leeway, it will actually be good for you because it would incentivize the discovery of these archaeological sites. So he's asking for narrowing and not removing of these laws as such. China provides an interesting alternative approach for source nations eager for foreign archaeological investment. From 1935 to 2003, China had a restrictive cultural property law that prohibited foreign ownership of Chinese cultural artifacts. In those years, China's most significant archaeological discovery occurred by chance in 1974 when a peasant farmers accidentally uncovered ranks of buried terracotta warriors which were part of Emperor Qin's spectacular tomb system. So what the author is giving the example of China. So from 1935 to 2003, they had strict cultural property laws. And what was the case? There were very few discoveries and most of them were accidental in nature. Few accidental discoveries, which means what? That there was no incentive to actually discover. So what did they do? In 2003, the Chinese government switched course, dropping its cultural property law and embracing collaborative international archaeological research. So this is what the author is saying, a middle path where you collaborate with international archaeologists to allow them to keep those archaeological findings for some time so that they can study them as such. Since then, China has nominated 11 archaeological sites for inclusion in the World Heritage Site list, including 8 in 2013, the most ever in China. So from 2003, the number of archaeological sites discovered shot up. Why did it shoot up? Because there was more incentive to dig. So more foreign collaboration was there, and because of that, there were far more number of discoveries. So what does the author say? See, the idea is that the cultural property laws were brought in to protect the cultural property from being looted by imperialists. But the unintended consequence of this has been that there is now no incentive for others, like other than the source country and its government, there is no other incentive for anybody else to go actually digging. And you need these people to dig, because otherwise you will not have discoveries. You need like foreign archaeological like investments. You need foreign archaeologists to come and dig so that they can actually find these sites as such. So how do you actually allow them, or how do you incentivize them? So the author proposes a collaborative method that was adopted by China. He's saying that don't remove all the cultural property laws, narrow them so that you give some incentive to dig. So this is what the author is proposing. Do not have very strict cultural property laws, have narrow cultural property laws such that your rights to that cultural property is protected, but the actual archaeological discoveries are also incentivized. Okay, so now that you understand what the passage is about, let's take a look at the questions. Which one of the following statements best expresses the paradox of patrimony laws? They were aimed at protecting cultural property, but instead reduced businesses for auctioneers like Sotheby's. The first part is true, it is aimed at protecting cultural property, but the downside is not that it reduced business for Sotheby's. The downside is that the number of archaeological sites that were found went down dramatically because nobody has any incentive to dig anymore. So A is incorrect, the first part is correct, the second part is incorrect. They were intended to protect cultural property, correct, but instead resulted in the neglect of historical sites. It's not neglect, it's just that the sites are not being discovered anymore. It's not that the sites that were already discovered have now been neglected. It is that discovery of sites, digging of sites has gone down dramatically, which is why there are very few discoveries now. So B is also incorrect. They were intended to protect cultural property, correct, but instead resulted in the withholding of national treasures from museums. The issue is not whether these national treasures were shown in museums or not. These national treasures were no longer found because nobody was digging anymore. So C is also missing the point. They were aimed at protecting cultural property, but instead reduced new archaeological discoveries. This is the whole point, that once you remove the incentive to dig, nobody is there actually going out and trying to find these like sites as such. So D is the paradox that is mentioned in the passage. The second question is, it can be inferred from the passage that archaeological sites are considered important by some source countries because it is directly given in this. So why do you need archaeological sites? It suggests that source countries, particularly in the developing world, should narrow their cultural property laws so that they can reap the benefits of new archaeological discoveries. And what are the benefits of new archaeological discoveries? Which typically increase tourism and enhance cultural pride. So what is why are some source countries, why do they consider it important? Because it boosts tourism. You go and see the China's terracotta warriors, right? It boosts tourism. Similarly, if you have archaeological discoveries, foreign travelers will come to your land to see that. So it boosts tourism and enhances cultural pride. If you see that, okay, my culture build these kind of warriors, they build these kind of statues, it will definitely enhance cultural pride. So these two reasons are given in the passage. So let's take a look at the options. Are a symbol of Western imperialism? No, these are not a symbol of Western imperialism. So the archaeological sites are not a symbol of Western imperialism. They were looted by Western imperialism. Are a subject to strict patrimony laws? This is true, they are subject to strict patrimony laws, but that's not why they are important. They are important because of what they offer the source countries. So B is incorrect. Generate funds for future discoveries? They don't generate any funds. You are actually just showing and standing it in your nation country. It's not like you're selling them. So this is incorrect. Give a boost to the tourism sector. This is the stated reason in the passage. So D is the right answer. The third question is, which one of the following statements, if true, would undermine the central idea of the passage? Affluent, archaeologically rich source countries can afford to carry out their own excavations. Now the author is saying this might be true. Okay, if you have a rich country, if you are an affluent country, you can fund it yourself. But the author is saying, what about the poor countries who are archaeologically rich? His recommendations are for the poor countries, not for the affluent countries. So this point does not undermine his hypothesis. His hypothesis is that poor archaeologically rich countries should narrow and restrict their cultural property laws so that they do not prevent or do not disincentivize archaeological discoveries. So this does not apply to the point he is making. So A can be eliminated. Museums established in economically deprived, archaeologically rich source countries can display the antiques discovered there. Now, even if this is true, that they can show it, it doesn't change the point being made by the author. The museums that are showing in these kind of countries, they are not able to fund the archaeological site discoveries. The museums in these like poor countries also don't have the money to fund archaeological discoveries. See, archaeological site discoveries requires investment. This investment generally comes from foreign countries, especially when it comes to poor countries. That kind of investment generally will come from foreign countries. When you have strict cultural property laws, that investment will evaporate, which means that there will be no more digging. So even if your museums are ready to show, they are not able to fund the discoveries, so the point remains. So B also can be eliminated. UNESCO finances archaeological research in poor but archaeologically rich source countries. Now, if UNESCO is funding it, why do you need foreign investment? UNESCO will give you money, you do that digging, and then you can find it. So the whole point was that you should restrict the cultural property laws, because otherwise you won't get investment, otherwise you won't get the incentive, people will not be incentivized to dig. But if UNESCO is ready to fund you without getting anything in return, then why should you actually restrict the cultural property laws? If C is true, you need not restrict the cultural property laws, you need not do collaboration with people who want to take them outside your country, because UNESCO is ready to do it for you, and it will not impose the same kind of restrictions or the same kind of that will be required by the foreign investors. So if C is true, the whole point of the author collapses, because you are no longer dependent on foreign investment and foreign interest in your archaeological sites. So if C is true, the entire point is undermined. Western countries will have to apologize to countries for looting their cultural property in the past century. Now, this apologizing has nothing to do with the point. The point that author is making is an economic point. At what level will people be incentivized to dig for archaeological sites? If you have these kind of strict cultural property laws, there is no economic incentive, so no one digs. This is the argument being made by the author. The author is not saying that who is responsible, who has to accept blame, who has to apologize. He has not gotten into that at all. So D can easily be eliminated. C is the right answer. The fourth question is, from the passage, we can infer that the author is likely to advise poor but archaeologically rich source countries to do all of the following except fund institutes in other countries to undertake archaeological exploration in source country, reaping the benefits of cutting edge techniques. Why would I fund another institute in some other country? If I wanted to fund, I would fund institutes in my own country. The whole point is that if you're a poor country, you do not have the funds to support these kind of things. So this is a insensible kind of an argument, and definitely the author will not advise like poor countries go and fund, India should fund Harvard and MIT to get the cutting edge discoveries. That is completely ridiculous. You would fund institutes or you would fund local efforts. You would not fund foreign universities, right? So this is clearly incorrect. So because it is incorrect, this would be the right answer. Let's take a look at A, B, C, D as well. Allow foreign countries to analyze and exhibit archaeological discoveries made in the source country. This he would agree with, because he is essentially arguing for a collaborative approach. You take it for some time, then you give it back to me, and that time is basically your incentive to dig. So this is something that he would agree with. You have to give something to those people so that at least access to this particular discovery for some time, so that they are also incentivized to dig. So B would be something that he would recommend. To find ways to motivate other countries to finance archaeological explorations in their country. This is also true. The author says that you should have a collaborative archaeological efforts. He wants the poor countries to allow foreign rich countries to explore the archaeological sites and incentivize them to do that. So this is something that he would agree with. Adopt China's strategy of dropping its cultural property laws and carrying out archaeological research through international collaboration. He is also mentioning that the China provides an interesting example. So what China did was it removed the strict cultural property laws and instead put a different kind of exploration laws as such, which were collaborative in nature. And the author does recommend that method. So D is something that he would agree with. A is the only one which is nonsensical essentially, because why would I fund an external institute? So A is the answer. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular video, we'll be taking a look at a reading comprehension passage which discusses a book by Steven Pinker and his ideas about rationality and how sequential reasoning is a better way to think as such. So let us take a look at the passage. We'll go paragraph by paragraph and then take a look at the questions. Steven Pinker's new book, Rationality, What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, Why It Matters, offers a pragmatic dose of measured optimism, presenting rationality as a fragile but achievable ideal in personal and civic life. Pinker's ambition to illuminate such a crucial topic offers the welcome prospect of a return to sanity. It's no small achievement to make formal logic, game theory, statistics and Bayesian reasoning delightful topics full of charm and relevance. So here the author introduces what he's talking about. He's talking about Steven Pinker's new book, which is on rationality. So Pinker's new book on rationality. This book argues that rationality is a achievable goal, a fragile but achievable goal as such. And the author praises Pinker for actually writing this because it is a crucial topic and it is well written. The author says that it has been written with charm and relevance, and he has written about difficult technical things with charm and relevance. So he's essentially saying that this is a crucial topic and it is well written as such. So this book he is praising initially, saying that what has Steven Pinker written? Steven Pinker has written about rationality, how it is an achievable goal as such, and the author praises him, saying that this is a very crucial topic. This represents a return to sanity. It's extremely crucial for public and civil life as such, and it is well written. He has written with charm. So basically he has introduced the book and offered it praise. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. It is also plausible to believe that a wider application of rational tool he analyzes would improve the world in important ways. His primer on statistics and scientific uncertainty is particularly timely and should be required reading before consuming any news about the COVID pandemic. More broadly, he argues that less media coverage of shocking but vanishingly rare events, from shark attacks to adverse vaccine reactions, would help prevent dangerous overreactions, fatalism and diversion of finite resources away from solvable but less dramatic issues like malnutrition in the developing world. So the author gives specific example where Pinker is actually right, where the Pinker's book actually offers valuable insight. So one valuable insight is basically when he says that the author feels that the rational tools that he actually recommends would improve the world in important ways. So this is good for the world, would improve the world if you actually use his rational tools as such. Particularly he singles out the idea of understanding statistics and scientific uncertainty. When he explains statistics and scientific uncertainty, the author says this should be required reading before people start discussing the pandemic. So when you have the pandemic, you had a lot of people sharing information about the pandemic. Oh, this pandemic affects only 1% of the people, so it is like the flu, and there was a lot of disinformation. Now essentially over here, or like even about the vaccine, when people were like, okay, you can't say for sure that you will not get, okay, or there is some amount of uncertainty involved about the working of the vaccine. So people could not understand statistics, or people could not understand scientific uncertainty, especially in this particular example. So the author says that if you consider Pinker's book, his work, especially around these two topics, is so important that he feels that it should be required reading, particularly in these times when people are clearly failing to understand these basic concepts as such. So the author gives the example of his writing on statistics and scientific uncertainty. He calls them required reading. Required reading basically is giving it a lot of importance, saying that this is like necessary to read, people should definitely read this. So he calls it that, look at this, this is extremely important, this work is important. More broadly, he says that what another point that the author highlights about giving less attention to low frequency and dramatic events. So essentially consider how the news actually tackles issues. So when you have malnutrition or malnutrition deaths, the news never covers it because it is not dramatic enough for news. But if you have one shark attack, okay, there will be 15 cameras covering the shark attack and the victim. So a lot of resources will actually be spent on preventing shark attacks and not enough money being spent on preventing malnutrition. The numbers wise, more people die of malnutrition than shark attack. But because this is like the like a dramatic, controversial, it grabs eyeballs, right? So news spends a lot of attention on that, and because news spends a lot of attention on that, people think more about that, and because people think more about that, politicians commit more resources for that. And he argues against this system, saying that we should not be over sensationalizing dramatic low probability events. So giving less attention to low probability dramatic events as such. So the author essentially cites these two examples where Pinker is essentially on the dot as such. She says the Pinker is absolutely correct. These are two cases where I feel I completely agree with what Steven Pinker is saying. It's a reasonable critique, and Pinker is not the first to make it. But analyzing the political economy of journalism, its funding structures, ownership concentration, and increasing relevance on social media shares would have given a fuller picture of why so much coverage is so misguided and what we might do about it. Now he comes, okay, this is important. The Pinker is right in saying that this is what should be done. But then he says that, but Pinker should have thought, why is this not the case? He should have actually thought about why news works this way. News works this way because of the funding structure, about how essentially how the funding structures in news channels are there, how ownership controls are there. Very few people actually own most of the news channels, and increasing reliance on social media shares, so it needs to be viral. So when you have those kind of restrictions, that is why the news focuses on certain types of news and does not focus on other types of news. So if he had actually thought of that, he would have explained why this is the case. So he is actually giving a reality check to a claim being made by Pinker. So while he agrees that this would be good, he gives a reality check by saying that, but it won't happen because in reality this is the case as such. So a reality check for the second example. Pinker's main focus is the sort of conscious sequential reasoning that can track the steps in a geometric proof for an argument in formal logic. Skill in this domain maps directly onto the navigation of many real-world problems, and Pinker shows how greater mastery of the tools of rationality can improve decision-making in medical, legal, financial, and many other contexts in which we must act on uncertain and shifting information. So here the author explains what exactly Pinker is telling. So Pinker's main focus is on the kind of sequential reasoning and rational, like a sequential reasoning as you would give a geometric proof. You know how you write a geometric proof, right? This triangle is similar to this triangle is similar to this triangle, hence QED, this triangle is similar to this triangle. So this is kind of a sequential reasoning where you have stepwise reasoning and there is no jump in reasoning anywhere as such. So his focus is mainly sequential reasoning. Now the author says that this kind of sequential reasoning would actually, and the rationality tools that he uses would actually help in many contexts. He gives the context of medical problems and legal financial problems as such, and especially in such cases it would actually improve your decision making, especially when you have uncertainty and shifting information. So he says that these kind of tools are useful in many contexts as such. I am guessing the next paragraph will give a but. So when you say, okay, this is good, then clearly the next paragraph would be, but in such cases this doesn't work. So I am guessing the next sentence, when he is put ... here, he is going to go with a kind of a saying that, okay, this is good, but. So let's take a look at the next paragraph. Despite the undeniable power of the sort of rationality he describes, many of the deepest insights in the history of science, maths, music and art strike their originators in moments of epiphany. From the 19th century chemist Frederick August Kekulé's discovery of the structure of benzene to any of Mozart's symphonies, much extraordinary human achievement is not the product of conscious sequential reasoning. Even Plato's Socrates, who anticipated many of Pinker's points by nearly 2500 years, showing the virtue of knowing what you do not know and examining all premises and arguments, not simply trusting speakers' authority or charisma, attributed many of his most profound insights to dreams and visions. Conscious reasoning is helpful in sorting the wheat from the chaff, but it would be interesting to consider the hidden aquifers that make much of the grain grow in the first place. So the author says, yeah, this sequential reasoning is good. It is good. I'm not denying that it doesn't have application. It has application in many contexts, but much of human progress and much of human discoveries, inventions has come from epiphanies and not sequential reasoning. So what do you mean by epiphanies? So sequential reasoning is like, okay, like a geometric proof. A is equal to B, B is equal to C, hence A is equal to C. But the author says that if you consider many discoveries, like the discovery of benzene structure. So the scientists who actually discovered benzene structure did not sequentially reason out that this has to be benzene structure. He dreamt of it. He discovered it. This was like his dream. In his dream, that benzene structure came. So the author says that many of these discoveries were essentially epiphanies. Many of Mozart's compositions, he didn't think mathematically that should be the composition. It was an act of inspiration as such. So the author says that if you consider all of the most of our important discoveries, they were epiphanies and not sequential reasoning. So the author is saying that, okay, while sequential reasoning is good, it is not the source of most of human progress as such. Even he says that, say Plato, Socrates and Pinker's points actually overlap quite a bit. Pinker says that you should not, he says many of Pinker's points were anticipated 25 years earlier, meaning that many of Pinker points made by Pinker were actually made by Socrates 2500 years back. So he says that you should know, by showing the virtue of knowing what you do not know and examining all premises and arguments. So you should examine how much do you know and what especially you do not know. This is something that Pinker says as well as Socrates said. This examining all the assumption in a particular context. Pinker says this as well as Socrates says this. So there is overlap in all of these points as such. But even Socrates believes that most of his profound insights actually came in dreams and visions. So even Socrates, who was a rationalist in many ways and who agreed to many of the rationalist ideas as such, rationalist, but many of his profound insights came in dreams and visions. So the author is saying that while sequential reasoning is good, profound insights or basically big discoveries, big leaps for humankind have actually come from dreams and visions. Conscious reasoning is helpful in sorting the wheat from the chaff, but it would be interesting to consider the hidden aquifers that make much of the grain grow in the first place. So this is a metaphor, okay? So the metaphor is basically about how you actually get the ideas. So the hidden aquifers essentially refers to hidden aquifers which grow grain. So hidden aquifers grow grain basically means that essentially like the springs, etc., the hidden sources of inspiration as such. These are the inspiration. These are dreams, vision that suddenly come to you. Okay. Now these will grow some ideas which are like grain. Now once you have that grain, you can actually separate the wheat from the chaff. Basically means you can discard the bad ideas out of good from sequential reasoning. But generation of new ideas is not through sequential reasoning, it is through inspiration as such. So essentially separating good ideas from bad, this can be done by sequential reasoning. But the ideation part itself, the creativity, it is inspiration, it is not sequential reasoning as such. So this, he says that this part is sequential reasoning, the part of ideating or creativity, it is essentially inspiration, it is dreams and vision as such. Okay. The role of moral and ethical education in promoting rational behavior is also underexplored. So the author has given examples, and one big problem he has with Pinker's use of sequential reasoning is the fact that it does not acknowledge that most of our good ideas, our progress has in fact come from inspiration and creativity and not from sequential reasoning. The second problem that he has is that the role of moral and ethical education is underexplored. Now let us see why that is the case. So Pinker recognizes that rationality is not just a cognitive virtue but a moral one. But this profoundly important point, once subtly explored by ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, doesn't really get developed. This is a shame, since possessing the right sort of moral character is arguably a precondition for using rationality in beneficial ways. So the author says that, see, Pinker acknowledges that you need, that rationality has to be moral. It is a moral choice as such. So rationality is a moral choice, not just a cognitive virtue. It's not just about thinking and maximizing this. It is not thinking like a machine, but it is a moral virtue as such. So rationality is moral virtue, which means that something that is immoral cannot be rational according to Pinker. But Pinker doesn't really explore what is morality and how it is like a precondition to be rational. So think of it in this way, okay, in terms of examples. See, think of it in the rationality employed by a machine. And a machine is not a moral being. So it might decide that in case of like maximizing human benefit, I should kill off these people, because if I kill off these people, I can maximize the amount of money that is there for other people, and therefore I'll maximize benefit. But that is an immoral choice. First, you should be moral. Once you are moral, then you can make rational decisions based on that morality. And the author says that he doesn't really explore how morality is like the first condition that you should consider. Then you can have all this sequential reasoning. Without a moral core, if you start doing sequential reasoning, you will be like a robot which will decide to kill people for the benefit of the larger good as such. So the author says that he doesn't really explore how morality and morality and virtue or ethical education are at the precondition of rationality as such. So this is the second criticism. So if you look at it in the whole, what is the author doing? So he is essentially analyzing Pinker's book. Whenever something is so difficult to understand, it is mostly an analysis, because there are arguments being given, and he is essentially giving pros and cons also. So the first thing that he does is he introduces Pinker's book. What has Pinker argued? Then he gives the pros of it. He says that it is well written. He says that, okay, there are many instances where I feel what he has said is valuable, but there are caveats to it. The caveat is that he is not being realistic over here. Then he comes to the real core, which is the critique of it, where Pinker actually falls short. And he has two main problems with Pinker's critique. The first problem is that he does not believe sequential reasoning is the source of progress or human progress. He believes that inspiration and creativity are where ideas are generated, and Pinker doesn't really consider that. He considers that, okay, through sequential reasoning we will make better decisions and we will progress as a humanity, and the author does not agree with that. And the second big problem that he has is that Pinker does not consider the ethical and moral precondition that one must have before he pursues rationality, because rationality without morals or ethics to the author is not rationality at all. The author says that Pinker acknowledges the importance of morality and ethical education, but he does not really explore it at all. So it is underexplored in the book. So these are the two main criticisms leveled against Pinker's book. This is an analysis of Pinker's book, both pros as well as cons. So now that you understand what the passage is about, let's take a look at the questions. The first question is, according to the author, for Pinker as well as the ancient Greek philosophers, rational thinking involves all of the following. So he says, okay, that for Plato, Socrates, who anticipated many of Pinker's points by nearly 2500 years, showing the virtue of all. So these are the points which he anticipated. Anticipated meaning what? That Plato and Socrates had the same ideas that Pinker is essentially putting in this book. And they were just 2500 years earlier, they had made the same points. So these points that are being made are essentially the points that are in common. From here to here, these are the points that are in common between both Pinker and Socrates. So what exactly is the points in common? Showing the virtue of knowing what you do not know and examining all premises and arguments, not simply trusting speaker's authority and charisma, attributed many of his conscious reasoning. So basically these are the points on which both agree with. So let's take a look at the options. An awareness of underlying assumptions in an argument and gaps in one's knowledge. This is something that they know. Something that you should know what you do not know, and you should be aware of the underlying assumptions. So this has been explicitly given, so A can be eliminated. The belief that the ability to reason logically encompasses an ethical and moral dimension. This is there over here. The author says that Pinker recognizes that rationality is not just a cognitive virtue but a moral one, and this is something that was agreed to by the ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. So this is also a point in common between both of them. So this also can be eliminated. The primacy of conscious sequential reasoning as the basis for seminal human achievements. Now, this is not a point in common with both Pinker and Greek philosophers. Pinker says that sequential reasoning is good for humanity. It would improve our decisions, but he does not say that this was the basis of seminal human achievements. In fact, the author says that if you look at human achievements, it was not the cause. So Pinker is also not claiming that, okay, it was sequential reasoning that made us, that helped us make all these discoveries and all. In fact, Greek philosophers categorically did not believe that. Socrates believed that most of his deep insights, profound insights, came from inspirations, true dreams and visions. So Greek philosophers definitely didn't agree with it, and this is not a claim made by Pinker also. So both of them would not actually say this. So C is the right answer. arriving at independent conclusions irrespective of who is presenting the argument. This is over here, not simply trusting speaker's authority or charisma. So this is also directly given, so D also can be eliminated. C is the right answer. The second question is, the author endorses Pinker's view on the importance of logical reasoning as it. So the author endorses the view that, okay, in many contexts, so the author says that, he gives two examples where it would have actually added value, and the author says that one is when we give less importance to dramatic but low probability news, and second is in statistics and sequential. And the author actually says that sequential reasoning or logical reasoning is useful in many contexts, like for example in medical, legal and financial and many other contexts when we must act on uncertain and shifting information. Here he actually says that Pinker is right in saying that logical reasoning would actually be helpful as such. So let us take a look at the options. Provides a moral compass for resolving important ethical dilemmas. The author says that logical reasoning is not the source of moral reasoning or moral or ethical education. The author says that moral and ethical education can come first, then you use logical reasoning after you have that. So this is not true. Focuses public attention on real issues like development rather than sensational events. But here this is not logical reasoning. He is endorsing a Pinker's view, but not on logical reasoning. The importance of logical reasoning is not that. Pinker's view is this, that you should focus on real issues like development and not sensational events, but this is not about importance of logical reasoning. So B also can be eliminated. Equips people with the ability to tackle challenging practical problems. This is true. This is what the author says, that this is in these many contexts where we have shifting information and uncertainty. This kind of logical reasoning would help you make better decisions, that it can improve decision making. So the author agrees that this importance of logical reasoning is applicable in these particular contexts. So C is the right answer. It helps people gain expertise in statistics and other scientific disciplines. The point is never to gain expertise in statistics, but about how having some basic understanding in statistics would help you make better decisions in real life. So D misses the main point as such, so D can be eliminated. C is the right answer. Third question, the author mentions Kekulé's discovery of the structure of benzene and Mozart symphonies to illustrate the point that great innovations across various fields can stem from flashes of intuition and are not always propelled by logical thinking. This is exactly the point being made over here, that in many different fields, from science to arts, you can have great innovations and great discoveries through dreams and visions, through inspiration and not through logical reasoning. This is the main point being made, so I'd say A is the right answer. Pinker's conclusion on sequential reasoning are belied by European achievements, which in the past were more rooted in unconscious bursts of genius. So here, this part is true. It's not that the conclusions of sequential reasoning are belied. The author says that Pinker's importance that he is giving to sequential reasoning is not borne out by how many discoveries were made. But here there is an important distortion added, which is European achievements. But the author is not just talking about European achievements. He is talking about human achievements in general, about how human achievements in general across fields have been because of inspiration and not through sequential reasoning. So because of this distortion, I can eliminate option B. It is not just the creative arts but also scientific fields that have benefited from flashes of creativity. The point is not that, okay, this is not just arts but also scientific fields. The broader point that he is making is that in many fields, from science to arts, it is the bursts of inspiration are often the cause of discoveries and innovations and not sequential reasoning. That is the point being made. So C is also missing the main point. Unlike the sciences, human achievements in other fields are a mix of logical reasoning and spontaneous epiphanies. Even in sciences, it is a combination of logical reasoning and spontaneous epiphanies. So this is distorted. D can be eliminated. The author refers to the ancient Greek philosophers too. So the author refers to the ancient Greek philosophers to show that they agreed with Pinker on many ideas about the use of rationality, about like considering what you know, what you don't know, actually using logical reasoning. But even they had a they assigned a primacy to ethical and moral point of view. They said, okay, you have to be first moral, you have to be first ethical. They've considered that to be primary and then use logical reasoning. So he uses Greek philosophers to show that unlike Pinker, they put primacy to moral and ethical education, and unlike Pinker, while they agreed on rationality, even they felt that many of the discoveries actually came from epiphanies and creativity and inspiration as such. So let's take a look at the options. show how dreams and visions have for centuries influenced subconscious behavior and path-breaking inventions. So it's not dreams and visions, and the author is not showing this with this particular example. The author gave the example of the benzene discovery and other things. So it was not about this example of philosophers is not another example to show across the centuries how this has been a part of how human progress has been made through dreams and visions. That is not the point. The point is basically to show that the Greek philosophers had a more holistic view of what kind of reasoning would help. Indicate the various similarities between their thinking and Pinker's conclusion. While he does highlight the similarities between their thinking and Pinker's, more importantly, he highlights the differences that the Greek philosophers put a lot of emphasis on moral and ethical education, the fact that they recognize the role played by inspiration. So B is also missing that point. Reveals gaps in Pinker's discussion of the importance of ethical considerations in rational behavior. This is the reason why he uses the Greek philosophers, that the Greek philosophers agree with this, and they in fact thought of your points 2500 years before you wrote your book. But they recognize what you failed to recognize. What did they recognize? The importance of ethical education. They highlight the gaps in Pinker's book by showing what these guys recognize but which Pinker failed to recognize as such. So C is the right answer. Highlight the influence of their thinking on the development of Pinker's arguments. So the author is not saying that Pinker was influenced by them. We do not know whether Pinker read them and then wrote his book. So we do not know this as such. And the point is not to show what influenced Pinker's arguments. In the last two paragraphs, mostly the author is showing what are the fallacies in Pinker's arguments. What are the, where is he actually wrong? He's actually criticizing on two main points, and he uses the Greek philosophers to highlight those points as such. So C is the real answer. So C is the correct answer.
We at Cracku provide all the previous year CAT papers along with many other MBA examinations such as XAT, SNAP, MAT, CMAT, TEST and PGDBA in the actual exam format. You can attempt them as a test and get a detailed analysis of your performance or download them as PDFs.
Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular video, we'll be taking a look at a reading comprehension passage, which is slightly difficult to read. The passage is difficult to read, but the questions are not that difficult. So in such kind of paragraphs, this was, I think, one of those paragraphs or those RCs which was left by most students who attempted this particular slot. But I feel that if you take a look at the passage, it is definitely difficult to read. But then you take a look at the questions, you should not have skipped this RC. So let's take a look at the passage. We'll go carefully line by line, paragraph by paragraph, because it's a difficult RC as such. So let's take a look at the first paragraph. Understanding romantic aesthetics is not a simple undertaking for reasons that are internal to the nature of the subject. So understanding romantic aesthetics is difficult because of the very nature of the subject, how it is actually. That is why understanding or studying it is a difficult task as such. Distinguished scholars such as Arthur Lovejoy, Northrop Frye and Isaiah Berlin have remarked on the notorious challenges facing any attempt to define romanticism. So three people have actually written how difficult it is to even define romanticism. So he has quoted, okay, this guy has said it is even difficult to define romanticism. Lovejoy, for example, claimed that romanticism is the scandal of literary history and criticism. So he says Lovejoy went to the extreme exaggeration by saying that this is it's not only difficult, it's a scandal, it's like controversy. Now, why does he call it a scandal or controversy? It's not that it is scandalous or controversial. He's saying that it is so difficult to define the subject that nobody can even agree on a definition. So that is why it's a scandal, because it is a controversial topic. Even the definition is a controversial topic because there is no one agreed upon definition as such. The main difficulty in studying the romantics, according to him, is the lack of any single real entity or type of entity that the concept of romanticism designates. So what is the main difficulty in studying romantic aesthetics? It is difficult to define what is romanticism. There is no one single concept or idea that can be associated with romanticism. Romanticism is a very vague idea. There is nothing that it concretely corresponds to. So if there is no idea that it actually denotes or strongly corresponds to, how do you even define it? If you can't define it, how do you study it? Lovejoy concluded, the word romantic has come to mean so many things that by itself it means nothing. The biggest problem is that you can't define what romanticism is. The word romantic itself is a very vague word. It can mean different things in different contexts. So because the word has no real meaning, no tangible, concrete meaning, the term romanticism also has no concrete meaning. The study of romantic aesthetics becomes very difficult, because if you are studying something which is very vaguely defined, how do you go about studying it? So here the author is basically talking about the difficulty in understanding or studying romantic aesthetics, and the main difficulty is that romanticism is poorly defined and a vague idea, so it is hence difficult to study romantic aesthetics. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. The more specific task of characterizing romantic aesthetics adds to these difficulties an air of paradox. Conventionally, aesthetics refers to the theory concerning beauty and art, or a branch of philosophy that studies these topics. Now basically, not only is romanticism difficult, when you specifically say not just romanticism but romantic aesthetics, it actually becomes paradoxical. Why does it become paradoxical? Then he says that, okay, when you say aesthetics, it talks about beauty and art. You have to essentially restrict yourself to beauty and art whenever you speak of aesthetics as such. But let's take a look at why it becomes paradoxical. However, many of the romantics rejected the identification of aesthetics with a circumscribed domain of human life that is separated from the practical and theoretical domains of life. So they are saying that no, this is not, this idea that okay, you separate aesthetics from practical life is a bad idea. They are saying that aesthetics should be part of entire life. You can't say that this part is aesthetics, this part is normal life. So romantics said no to this idea as such. So when you say romanticism is against aestheticism. So if you say romantic aesthetics, the idea becomes like a onomatopoeia. Both are paradoxical in nature. Romanticism says that beauty and art should be part of all life. Aestheticism says no, this is this part of life, this is practical part of life, they are two different part of life. So then, because when you say okay, subsection of romanticism, I want to study romantic aesthetics, it becomes paradoxical in nature. The most characteristic romantic commitment is to the idea that the character of art and beauty and of our engagement with them should shape all aspects of human life. So one of the most important characteristics of romanticism is that art and beauty should be part of all life. It should not be part of just aesthetics. So when you say aesthetics, basically you say that okay, painting should be beautiful, or like works of art should be beautiful. All of these, when you say aesthetically, it should be, when you say okay, aesthetics should be limited to this, and aesthetically this, it refers to only beauty and art, the romantics actually disagree with it. They feel that every part of life should be should have beauty and art. So if you're making a car, it should have beauty and art. If you make a even like a simple pillar, it should have beauty and art. They believe that everything in life should be suffused with beauty and art. It is not a separate part of life, and it is like characteristic of romanticism. It's not just one idea, it is one of the defining characteristics of romanticism, that you put beauty, art, aesthetics at the core of everything. You don't separate it from normal life as such. Being fundamental to human existence, beauty and art should be a central ingredient not only in philosophical or artistic life, but also in the lives of ordinary men and women. So this is what they believe in, that it is central to your life. When you have ordinary men and women, they should actually believe or aspire for aesthetics. They should aspire for beauty and art. It's not as if only like certain people should pursue beauty and art. Everybody, ordinary people should have beauty and art in their lives as such. So it is a core belief of romanticism. So how do you have romantic aesthetics where you actually separate aestheticism from ordinary life as such? Another challenge for any attempt. So this basic idea, this is one idea. Okay, this is another challenge, is another idea. So let me actually write down the main point of this part as such. So the second difficulty he is mentioning is that the second difficulty is aestheticism believes in separation of beauty and art from ordinary life. Aestheticism is essentially defined as only looking at beauty and art, but romanticism believes that beauty and art should be part of everything. So this aestheticism, when you say aestheticism, you are essentially separating beauty and art from ordinary life, but romanticism believes it should be essential part of all life as such, believes beauty and art central to all life. So what is the problem from that? The fact that these two have opposite ideas about the role of beauty in life as such, there is an inherent paradox. When you say romantic aestheticism, there is a paradox. Romanticism believes one core tenet is that beauty and art should be everywhere, and aestheticism, when you say romantic aestheticism, you are saying that okay, this separate part I am going to study separately. So there is an inherent paradox in this idea, which is the second main difficulty in understanding romantic aesthetics. First is like difficulty in defining romanticism. Second difficulty is that okay, romanticism and aesthetics is inherently paradoxical in nature, inherently opposing in nature. There's an idea which is there in aestheticism which is clearly opposite of the central idea of romanticism as such. Another challenge for any attempt to, so this will be the third difficulty, another challenge to for any attempt to characterize romantic aesthetic lies in the fact that most of the romantics are poets and artists whose views of art and beauty are, for the most part, to be found not in developed theoretical accounts, but in fragments, aphorisms and poems which are often more elusive and suggestive than conclusive. So what is the author saying over here? See, when somebody is actually talking about a concept, you want them to write a proper book about it, like write a theoretical account, write a nice essay. Then when you write an essay, I will understand it clearly, right? But here the most romantic aesthetics were not like writers, or they were not philosophers, or they were not philosophical writers as such. So there are no theoretical accounts. What are there? There are poems, there are aphorisms, there are fragments, like some poetic prose is written somewhere. So there is no proper theoretical account saying, okay, this is my idea, this is what romantic aesthetic stands for, this is what we believe in, this, nothing of that sort is there. There are just poems. Now the issue with poems is that poems don't completely spell out what they actually believe in. They just suggest it. So a lot is left to the imagination of the reader. So because a lot is left to the imagination of the reader, there is no clear account of what romantic aesthetic stands for. So basically, if you have one idea, okay, you have an idea, if you write an account of it, if you write an essay on it, the reader will know exactly what you mean. If you write a poem on it, the reader will have to like guess what you mean at it. And this is the third difficulty. No theoretical account. Poets and artists who write in aphorisms and poems and aphorisms. So basically no clear account of what romantic aesthetics is. Okay, so now that we understand the three main difficulties in like studying romantic aesthetics, let's take a look at the next part as such. Nevertheless, in spite of these challenges, the task of characterizing romantic aesthetics is neither impossible nor undesirable, as numerous thinkers responding to Lovejoy's radical skepticism have noted. So basically the author is saying that, okay, there are three challenges, there are three difficulties, but it is not impossible to actually define and study romantic aesthetics. The author says that it is not impossible. He says undesirable, neither impossible nor undesirable. So what is undesirable over here? The author says that undesirable basically means that doing so would actually harm the subject, or doing so would actually be detrimental. So the author says that doing so or studying romantic aesthetics would not be detrimental. So the author says that it is neither impossible nor undesirable to study romantic aestheticism, and many people have actually told Lovejoy that. Lovejoy is skeptical about studying romanticism and studying romantic aestheticism, but many people have actually written that no, Lovejoy is wrong in this particular account. It is possible to define romantic aestheticism, it is possible to study romantic aestheticism as such. So not impossible or undesirable, possible and good to study romantic aestheticism as told by other authors. Okay. Now let's take a look at the next particular have noted, while warning against a reductive definition of romanticism, Berlin, for example, still heralded the need for a general characterization. So he said that you should not have a reductive definition. Reductive basically means you shouldn't oversimplify it. Oh, romanticism is basically having a rosy picture of everything. That is a very oversimplified idea of what romanticism is. So you should not have a reductive definition, but you should still have a general characterization of what romanticism is. You should have some definition. Now romanticism cannot be accurately defined. but it can be defined in general terms of what you mean by romanticism. So Berlin said that it is, we can give a general characterization of what romanticism is as such. So although one does not have certain sympathy with Lovejoy's despair, he is in this instance mistaken. There was a romantic moment and it is important to discover what it is. So Berlin says that, okay, I understand why Lovejoy is despairing. I understand his, like when he highlights the difficulties in like saying what is romanticism, I understand his reason for like being so sad about it or being so despondent about it. But Berlin says that no, there was a romantic movement. There was clearly romanticism. Many people actually contributed to the movement. So if it was there, it is possible to define it. So essentially a lot of people are essentially saying, so Lovejoy was saying that it is impossible to define it. People are saying that you should not have a reductive definition, but it is still possible to have a definition of romanticism, to identify what is the romantic movement and to give a general characteristic of it. So many other authors do not agree with Lovejoy and say that it is possible to define romanticism and romantic aesthetics movement as such. So possible and good to this. Other authors disagree with Lovejoy. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. Recent attempts to characterize romanticism and to stress its contemporary relevance follow this path. Instead of overlooking the undeniable differences between the variety of romanticisms of different nations that Lovejoy had stressed, such studies attempt to characterize romanticism not in terms of a single definition, a specific time or a specific place, but in terms of particular philosophical questions and concerns. So basically, many of the guys, recent attempts who have, like many of the people who have tried to study romantic aesthetics in recent times have said that it is possible and we can give general characteristics of this particular movement. And they have like not tried to generalize it by a specific time, saying, okay, at this time in this period, romanticism was like this, and in this time, romanticism was like that. Nor are they trying to say that, okay, in this particular nation, this is like this, or it's not like, it is not defined by time or place, or there's no single definition of romanticism. But what they define romanticism is by the philosophical questions that it tried to like raise or philosophical concerns it had. So consider it in this way. It's difficult to understand, but essentially, so romanticism basically says that, okay, it's a movement. Okay, how do you define this movement? So instead of saying that it occurred from 1700s to 1805, not like that. You don't define it by time, not defined by time or place. You don't say that it occurred in Western Europe between this period to this period. Not defined by time or place, or even like the nations or by single definition. So there is no concrete concept also that romanticism is defined by. So all of this is not how you actually define romanticism. How you define romanticism? You define it by the questions it try to answer. So basically say that if romanticism, I don't know what exactly romanticism actually tries to answer, but let's say that romanticism tried to answer how to look at life, how to infuse beauty and art in all aspects of life. So, suppose that is one of the concern of romanticism. So you are not really saying that what is the romantic movement, you are not giving a concrete idea saying that this is the romantic movement. So you just say that romantic movement was a movement which tried to answer XYZ questions. So that is a very broad definition, but it is still a general definition. It's not that there is no definition. There is a definition, but it is not in your usual terms. When you say there was a Renaissance movement, you had Renaissance in this period, in this time, in this place. Renaissance was from this AD to this AD, and in Italy, you could give like place, time, etc. Now this movement is not that clearly well defined. It doesn't have a clear time definition, a place definition, or even a conceptual definition as such. But you can define this movement by the type of questions they try to answer as such. So instead of saying, okay, this is the CAT exam which is taking place in every year in November, you say that, okay, CAT exam is like trying to answer questions of this type where VARC questions are asked, quant questions are asked. So essentially you are not defining the movement by essential characteristics, but you are defining the movement by the type of questions they try to answer. Okay. While German, British and French romantics are all considered, the central protagonists in the the central protagonists in the following are the German romantics. Two reasons explain this focus. First, because it has paved the way for other romanticisms. German romanticism has pride of place among the different national romanticisms. Second, the aesthetic outlook that was developed in Germany roughly between 1796 and 1801 to 1802, the period that corresponds to the heyday of what is known as early romanticism, offers the most philosophical expression of romanticism since it is grounded primarily in the epistemological, metaphysical, ethical and political concerns that the German romantics discerned in the aftermath of the Kant philosophy. Now basically this romantic movement that we have identified that we want to study, it has different nations, okay. There is German, British and French romantics as such, and all are considered, but special focus is given to German romantics. Why special focus is given to one nation as such? Why is it given to German romantics? Firstly, because they paved the way for others. So because they were like the pioneers, they were the path breakers, they were the at the vanguard of the movement. So that is why they are studied more. So they paved the way. And the second reason is that when you have the peak of romanticism, which is the early romanticism, this is mostly grounded in the issues that were there, that were discussed in Germany in the aftermath of Kant's philosophy. So basically if you consider, okay, what are the issues, where did they rise from? So issues of early romanticism mostly arose from the social social conditions of Germany as such. So because of that, when you try to understand why the romantic movement is the way it is, you will understand it because if you understand the social conditions where those concerns arose, and the social conditions where those concerns arose was in Germany. So that's why when you are studying the romanticism movement, you consider all the different romantics, the British romantics, the French romantics, but special consideration is given to the German romantics because firstly they were at the vanguard of the movement, they were the ones who paved the way, and secondly the issues that were discussed, the philosophical concerns, questions, where did those come from? Those came from basically in the context of the German, this as such. The German social conditions gave the context for the issues and the philosophical considerations of romanticism. So that is why it is given a special focus. Now this is a very long RC and difficult to understand, a lot of things are given. So this is essentially an explanatory RC. The main point that the author is trying to make is that a lot of people felt that it is difficult to study romantic aesthetics. Three reasons are given. But still it is possible, difficult but possible to study romantic aesthetics. Then the author says, how is romantic aestheticism actually defined? It is not defined by place, time, anything. It is actually defined by the considerations or concerns that arose during the moment. Now, once you have said, okay, this is romanticism, this is how I define it. Now, who are you going to study? So the author says that when you define it this way, there will be a lot of romantics and a lot of romanticism period would be covered. But special focus is given to German romanticism because of these two reasons. So he is essentially saying that it is possible to study romantic aestheticism. This is how you define it. And once you have defined it, you give special focus to German romanticism. So now that we understand what the entire passage is about, let's take a look at the questions. The main difficulty in studying romanticism is the elusive and suggestive nature of romantic aesthetics. It is not elusive and suggestive nature of romantic aesthetics. This elusive and suggestive nature is of poems. Now, because you have written all of your romantic aestheticism in poems, then it is difficult to study. The romantic aesthetics is not elusive and suggestive. Poems are elusive and suggestive because poems are written in metaphors. Poems are written in veiled language. Poems are not direct, no. So because poems are not direct, they are elusive and suggestive in nature, and because they are elusive and suggestive in nature, you can't study romantic aestheticism properly. But romantic aestheticism is not elusive and suggestive. So they have distorted two things by taking something which was a characteristic of something else and putting it on something else as such. So A is a distortion. Lack of clear conceptual contours of the domain. This is the main difficulty. You look at it over here. The Lovejoy clearly says the main difficulty in studying the main difficulty in studying the romantics according to him is the lack of any single real entity or type of entity that the concept of romanticism designates. So romanticism is not connected to any concrete idea that you can say that yes, this is romanticism. So because of that, it is difficult to study romantic aesthetics. This is the clear answer as such. They are saying very clearly that the concept has no clear idea. There is no clear contours basically means boundary. So there is no clear boundary to define that this is the concept and this concept over here refers to romanticism, and that's why it is difficult to study it, because there is no clear concept. What is romanticism is very vaguely defined. So B is the correct answer. Controversial and scandalous history of romantic literature. So romantic literature is not controversial, it is not scandalous. So it's not as if like some scandal occurred where like people behaved very badly. That's not what happened. When the author says, when Lovejoy says the scandal of literary history and criticism, he is basically saying that it is like hotly debated, it is controversial, but not controversial for like what we consider salacious or controversial. It is controversial because people are not able to arrive at a single definition. When people disagree, there is controversy. So this is an exaggeration, and that exaggeration has been reworded and put here out of context as such. So C is incorrect. Absence of written accounts by romantic poets and artists. This is true. This is one of the difficulties in studying romanticism, but this is the third difficulty. The absence of, it's not written accounts, it's the absence of theoretical accounts. But this absence of theoretical accounts by romantic poets and artists is a difficulty, but it's the third difficulty. So there is a slight distortion, and this is not the main difficulty, this is the third difficulty given. First difficulty is the idea is not properly defined. Second difficulty is aestheticism and romanticism are at odds with each other. The third difficulty is that there are no theoretical accounts. So it's not written accounts, it's theoretical accounts. Poems are also written down, but poems are not like essays. The author says that you need essays to study a topic, and that is missing. So second question is, according to romantics, aesthetics should be confined to a specific domain separate from the practical and theoretical aspects of life. This is completely wrong. They believe the opposite of that. They believe that it should be part of everything. It should be central ingredient of life, part of not just the life of artists and like those who are involved in these kind of things, but life of ordinary men and women. Beauty and aesthetics, beauty and art should be part of everybody's life, everywhere. That is what that is one of the central beliefs of romantics as such. So A is the opposite of what they believe. Is primarily the concern of philosophers and artists rather than ordinary people? No, they believe that it should be a concern of everybody. So B is also clearly opposite of what they believe in. Is widely considered to be irrelevant to human existence? No, they say it is the central ingredient of human existence, central ingredient of human life. So clearly opposite. Like it is so easy to actually answer this, because it is like three options are opposite of what the author has mentioned in the passage. Permeates all aspects of human life, philosophical and mundane. This is very easy to answer, and you should have been able to answer it. It is a direct answer from the passage, and A, B, C are clearly wrong. They are opposite of what the author has actually said. So D is the right answer. Which one of the following statements is not supported by the passage? Characterizing romantic aesthetics is both possible and desirable despite the challenges involved. This he specifically says that it is possible, it is desirable, it is something that we should do, and though there are three difficulties that are mentioned, it is still possible and desirable, and this is something that we should do. This the author has specifically said in the second paragraph. So not second paragraph, third paragraph. Nevertheless, it is actually neither impossible nor undesirable. So this he has specifically said, so we can eliminate option A. Recent studies on romanticism seek to refute the differences between national romanticisms. No, they don't seek to refute the differences. Recent studies on romanticism accept that there are differences. They consider all different types of romanticism, and they focus specifically on German romanticism. It's not that they seek to refute differences between national romanticism. Recent studies on this basically characterize not by place or time, they characterize by the philosophical questions raised. So it's not that, okay, I will say that there are no differences between German romanticism and French romanticism. There are differences. They are not trying to refute the differences. This is not true at all. So B would be the right answer. Romantic aesthetics are primarily expressed through fragments, aphorisms and poems. This is the third difficulty that is mentioned, that they are not in developed theoretical accounts, but in fragments, aphorisms and poems, and this is causing the third difficulty. So this is mentioned. Many romantics rejected the idea of aesthetics as a domain separate from other aspects of life. A very clear second idea, it is very clearly mentioned. So D is also correct. B is the right answer. Recent studies have not tried to say that there is no difference between national romanticism. They have essentially tried to not define romanticism according to national lines, but they have tried to define romanticism according to the question states. So B is the right answer. So the fourth question is, according to the passage, recent studies on romanticism avoid a single definition, a specific time or a specific place because. So you look at the paragraph which is involved. Over here the author is saying, instead of recent attempts to characterize romanticism and to stress its contemporary relevance, follow this path. Instead of overlooking the undeniable differences between a variety of romanticisms and the different nations that Lovejoy had stressed, such studies attempt to characterize romanticism not in terms of a single definition, a specific time or a specific place, but in terms of particular philosophical questions or this. So they don't define it in terms of single definition or specific time or place, because they would rather define it in terms of the philosophical questions raised. Why would you define it in terms of philosophical questions raised rather than the specific time period as such? Because it is easier to define that way. So that is why they are doing it by questions raised rather than by the place time, because when you try to define by time, place, etc., you find that it is difficult to define the idea of romanticism. So you'd rather define it by the philosophical questions raised or the concerns raised. So let's take a look at the options. Understand that a variety of romanticisms renders a general analysis impossible. This is an exaggeration. General analysis is impossible. It is difficult. It was simpler if you go by the way of questions, but it is not impossible if you go by the way of the different romanticisms that are involved. So because this is an exaggeration, A can be eliminated. Prefer to highlight the paradox of romantic aesthetics as a concept. They don't prefer to highlight the paradox. The paradox is a difficulty. They are trying to overcome the difficulty as such. They are not trying to highlight the difficulty that this is a paradox. So B is incorrect. Prefer to focus on the fundamental concerns of the romantics. This is the idea, that instead of defining by space, place, time, etc., I would rather define it by the concerns raised, because it is a more unifying definition. So this would be the right answer. Seek to discredit Lovejoy's skepticism regarding romanticism. They are not trying to discredit anyone. So even Berlin, when he says that, okay, I understand his despair, I understand Lovejoy's despair, but I disagree with him. He's not trying to discredit Lovejoy. They are not being like saying that Lovejoy is wrong or Lovejoy doesn't know what he's doing. He's not, discredit is a very strong negative word. They disagree with him, and the point is not that they want to disagree with him. The point is that they want to show that a definition of romanticism is possible. So D is clearly incorrect. C is the right answer. They are not against Lovejoy. The point is they are saying that, you know what, it is possible. I understand why Lovejoy is like feeling that this is so difficult to do. I understand the difficulties that he has pointed out are valid, but I still believe it is possible to do that. And they are not doing it to slight Lovejoy. They are trying to do it because they want to define this. Okay, so D is clearly incorrect. C is the right answer. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular video, we'll be discussing an RC passage which is about an idea that is presented in a book which is called the Nutmeg curse. So let's take a look at the passage. We'll go paragraph by paragraph and then take a look at the questions. The biggest challenge the Nutmeg curse by Ghosh throws down is to the prevailing understanding of when the climate crisis started. Most of us have accepted that it started with the widespread use of coal at the beginning of the industrial age in the 18th century and worsened with the mass adoption of oil and natural gas in the 20th. Ghosh takes this history at least 3 centuries back to the start of the European colonialism in the 15th century. He starts the book with 1621 massacre by Dutch invaders determined to impose a monopoly on nutmeg cultivation and trade in the Banda Islands in today's Indonesia. Not only do the Dutch systematically depopulate the island through genocide, they also try their best to bring nutmeg cultivation into plantation mode. These are the 2 points to which Ghosh returns through examples from around the world. One, how European colonists decimated not only the indigenous populations, but also the indigenous understanding of the relationship between humans and earth. 2, how this was an invasion not only of humans, but of earth itself, and how this continues to the present day of looking at nature as a resource to exploit. So lot is to unpack here. Let's put it in parts, let's cut it. So first thing that the author says that many of us think that the climate crisis started with the industrial age. When we started burning a lot of coal, it produced the smoke that caused the global warming, and that has resulted in the climate crisis that we see today. But Ghosh's book, which is the Nutmeg Curse, says that no, that was not the start of the climate crisis. The start of the climate crisis was actually 300 years earlier with the start of the European colonialism. What happened with the European colonialism? These Europeans went to other countries. He takes the example of the Dutch invaders who went to Banda in Indonesia. And what did they do? They tried to impose their rules on the local population. They tried to monopolize the nutmeg cultivation as such. So, main idea is that Ghosh's book states or argues that climate change started with European colonialism. Now, why does he say that this started with the European colonialism? So, from here he gives the example of the Dutch massacre. So, what happened with the Dutch massacre? In the Dutch massacre, he gives the example that in the Dutch massacre, they tried to monopolize the cultivation of nutmeg. So, the Dutch people went to the Banda Islands, which are the Indonesian islands. They committed a genocide there and they tried to impose their way of cultivation on the local population. The local population had a different way of cultivation. They tried to enforce a plantation method on the local population. So, the Dutch massacre is emblematic of how European colonialism started the climate change. So, why is this emblematic? How is this emblematic of how European colonialism led to climate change? So, he gives two reasons why this kind of European colonialism was the start of climate change. The first reason is that the genocide not just killed the people, but it also killed their understanding, the local understanding of the relationship between earth and humans. So, the indigenous tribes had a different understanding of the relationship between earth and humans. They had a more symbiotic relationship. These guys took that away, killed it and changed it with plantation mode. Plantation mode is basically a kind of an industrial way of cultivation. You maximize output. When you want to maximize output, you would use the plantation method. So, you kill the local indigenous way of interacting with nature and replaced it with the industrial, the colonial way of interacting with nature. So, the local understanding of nature-human relationship. It killed this along with the humans as such. So, this was the first reason why this led to climate change. And secondly, what was the second reason? How this was an invasion not only of humans but of earth itself, and how this continues to the present day by looking at nature as a resource to exploit. So, this second reason was the mindset that came with it. What was the mindset? Why did the European colonialists go to these colonies? They wanted to exploit the colonies, they wanted to exploit the people there and even the land. And this kind of mindset that those people actually thrived by exploiting the earth essentially built this mindset that we have to exploit nature. As much as we can derive from nature, we should derive. We should essentially squeeze nature dry. That mindset, the author says, is the reason why we have climate change. This mindset is the second reason why the European colonialism was the start of climate change. So, Ghosh essentially argues that no, industrial evolution was not the start of climate change. The European colonialism was the start of the climate change. He gives two reasons for it. He gives the example of how the Dutch invaders imposed a plantation style method of cultivation in nutmeg cultivation to enforce a monopoly. But that kind of examples and many examples like this basically show how the European mindset was that I have to derive everything. So, firstly, they killed the indigenous understanding. The indigenous understanding was more caring. It cared about nature. They cut that down, they killed it and it replaced it with a mindset that I have to derive all I can. Now, that mindset is very, very harmful. That mindset is why our earth was essentially exploited to this level, and that mindset is why we are in a climate crisis today. So, the Ghosh traces back the start of the climate change to start of European colonialism because of this mindset as such. So, now that we understand this paragraph, let's take a look at the next paragraph. We know we are facing more frequent and more severe heat waves, storms, floods, droughts and wildfires due to climate change. We know our expansion through deforestation, dam building, canal cutting, in short terraforming, the word Ghosh uses, has brought us repeated disasters. Are these the responses of an angry Gaia who has finally had enough? By using the word curse in the title, the author makes it clear that he thinks so. I use the pronoun who knowingly because Ghosh has quoted many non-European sources to inquire into the relationship between humans and the world around them so that he can question the prevalent way of looking at Earth as an inert object to be exploited to the maximum. So what exactly is the author saying? So the author says that our current behavior towards Earth, which is called as terraforming, when we build dams, etc., 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 cut into Earth, this terraforming has brought many natural disasters, has invited natural disasters. And the author says that are these natural disasters a way for the Earth to essentially curse us, to show us how angry she is. Now the author says that when Ghosh used the word curse, he clearly intended that he intended to depict the Earth as somebody who could curse. And who can curse? A person can curse. Somebody with feelings, things, with sentience can curse. So the author very knowingly chose a way of depicting Earth as a being which can do things. Similarly, this author of this particular passage is also calling it who. It is giving a pronoun which is a person pronoun. Now, why is it personifying Earth? It is personifying Earth because that was the indigenous understanding of Earth. When we have Indian understanding, we have like Earth Mother, Dhati Ma. The other indigenous understanding of Earth were also a person kind of this. So the personification was a more caring way of looking at Earth. Now, once you remove that personification understanding, you are looking at Earth as a resource to be exploited, that it is an inert object and that inert object can be treated whatever way you want. And both Ghosh as well as the author of this passage want to like purposefully refer to it as a person to actually reverse this bad mindset that we had actually used to exploit Earth as such. So our current behavior has invited natural disasters, and purposefully both Ghosh as well as this current author want to personify or give a personification to Earth as such, person status to Earth. They do not want Earth to be viewed as an inert object as such. Ghosh and author personify Earth. As Ghosh's texts, notes and bibliography show once more, none of this is new. There have always been challenges to the way European colonists looked at other civilizations and at Earth. It is just that the invaders and their myriad backers in the fields of economics, politics, anthropology, philosophy, literature, technology, physics, chemistry, biology have dominated the global intellectual discourse. So the author says that this view of looking at Earth is not new. This idea that we look at Earth as a person is not a new idea. It's not like Ghosh's idea that we look at it as a person. This is a very old idea. But why did it never catch on? Why did other people never look at it this way? Why was it not the predominant idea? It was not the predominant idea because the European ideas, the Europeans dominated every sphere, from economics, politics, anthropology, biology, chemistry, every sphere they dominated, and their ideas came to dominate the global intellectual discourse, and they never viewed Earth as a person. So that is why the author is saying that this personification is not a new idea. This is an old idea as such, but European domination of fields ensured that the European idea of Earth was dominant. There are other points of view that we can hear today if we listen hard enough. Those observing global climate negotiations know about the Latin American way of looking at Earth as Pachamama, Earth Mother. They also know how such framing is just provided lip service and is ignored in the substantive portions of the negotiations. In the Nutmeg's curse, Ghosh explains why. He shows the extent of the vested interest in the oil economy, not only for oil exporting countries, but also for a superpower like the US that controls oil drilling, oil prices and oil movement around the world. Many of us know power utilities are sabotaging decentralized solar power generation today because it hits their revenues and control, and how the other points of view are so often drowned out. So here the author says that, see, now people are actually using these terms like Pachamama, which is the Latin American way of calling Earth Mother, but this indigenous view of Earth as a person has existed for a very long time. It was there in the indigenous Indonesia, it is there in Latin America. We know that it is there in India also. Now it is getting lip service. Lip service basically means what? That people use that name, but they don't use it with the intention or meaning that that name conveys. So you look at the policies, they never treat Earth as Earth Mother, but they use the term Pachamama and they call it Earth Mother and all, but they never treat Earth as the person, they never treat her as Earth Mother. And there is a vested economic interest in doing that. The US superpowers like US control much of the oil drilling, oil production, oil movement around the world, and many of these oil companies want to keep drilling. So while they will say Pachamama and all of these things, they will continue to do things which essentially destroy the earth. So essentially what is the author saying? That while the personification of earth is getting lip service, Earth continues to be exploited as a resource. So essentially what is the author saying? The author is saying that if you look at the world, there used to be this concept of relationship between humans and Earth. Earth was considered as a person, and when European colonists essentially colonized the rest of the world, their view of Earth was essentially foisted down on these other parts of the world. It killed the indigenous way of looking at Earth and essentially made the mindset, like a global mindset, became of exploiting Earth to the maximum. Now, even though we actually provide lip service, and lip service basically means that, okay, saying, you want diversity, you want to prevent climate change, but in actuality, you are not doing anything of that sort. So you are just saying those words because they sound good, but you are not really doing anything which is in line with what you are saying. So now while people use these words of Earth Mother and personification to sound good, but they continue to exploit the earth. So essentially the author is saying that this mindset of exploit earth to the maximum, get everything out of it, that mindset was essentially spread by European colonialism, and that mindset is the spread of that mindset is essentially the root cause of climate change. The start of climate change started with European colonialism. Once that mindset spread everywhere around the globe, and these people hold, essentially the European colonists are essentially continue to hold a they have a hold on the economies of the world as well as the intellectual discourse of the world. So their ideas still continue to be dominant. Their way of thinking of earth continues to be dominant. Their way of treating earth continues to be dominant. So this is exactly why the author is saying that that was the start of the climate change. So now that we can understand what the passage is about, let's take a look at the questions. On the basis of the information in the passage, which one of the following is not a reason for the failure of policies seeking to address climate change? The greed of organizations benefiting from non-renewable energy sources. This is given specifically over here. Many of us know power utilities are sabotaging decentralized power, solar power generation today because it hits their revenues and control. So because their revenues get hit, they don't want the solar panel generation. So this is given in this example. So A can be eliminated. The global dominance of oil economies and international politics built around it. This is given over here. He shows the extent of Western interest in the oil economy, not only for oil exporting countries, but also for super powers like US that controls oil drilling, oil prices and oil movement around the world. So Ghosh says that this is one of the reasons why we have not really done to actually do anything about climate change as such. So those who are seeing global climate change negotiations know that this framing of Earth as Earth Mother is just lip service. They are not really treating Earth with any respect, and this has been given as a reason. So B is also true. The marginalized status of non-European ways of looking at nature and the environment. The author states that over here, there have always been challenges to the European colonists looked at other civilizations and Earth. So this, how other non-Europeans looked at Earth was a challenge to the European colonist view of Earth. But the European colonial view of Earth dominated the global intellectual discourse. Because they dominated the global intellectual discourse, the other non-European way of looking at Earth was never dominant. So this is one of the this is also given as one of the reasons. So C is incorrect. The decentralized characteristic of renewable energy sources like solar power. So the author says that solar power is decentralized, but the decentralization is not given as the reason why it has been unable to challenge like fossil fuel generation of power. The author says that it is not because it is decentralized, it is because that these oil companies are and power utility companies are actively sabotaging the solar energy production. So it is not the decentralized character which is at fault, it is the sabotaging that is at fault. So this is not true according to the passage. So D is not a reason given, D is the correct answer. Which one of the following, if true, would make the reviewer's choice of the pronoun who for Gaia inappropriate? So the reviewer uses the word pronoun who for Gaia to show that many indigenous cultures use the pronoun or essentially used to personify Gaia. That the local indigenous understanding of Gaia was as Earth Mother. They used to personify her, and because they personified her, they used to treat her better. There was the indigenous understanding of the relationship between humans and nature was far more healthy for nature. And the author insists, Ghosh uses the term curse to essentially say that understanding that people used to treat her as a person, somebody who can curse you. And the personification of Earth is intentional in Ghosh's book as well as in the passage, because in the passage the reviewer is trying to say that we used to think of it like the local indigenous people used to think of it as a person, and that relationship was killed by the European colonialists. So the author makes that view only on the fact that this personification view was a healthier way of looking at Earth as such. So let's take a look at the options. Modern Western science discovers new evidence for Earth being an inanimate object. That's not the point. So it's not whether it's an animate object or an inanimate object. The Earth is definitely an inanimate object. It is not really a person. So you're not calling her Earth Mother because she's actually a mother or anything of that sort. You're calling the Earth Mother out of respect for what the Earth is giving you. It is providing you with everything you need to live, right? So it is a form of relationship that you're building with nature. The personification is a way of showing respect and care towards Earth. When you treat a thing like an inanimate object, you obviously will not care for an inanimate object. The reason why these guys are saying, say, who or Earth Mother is because you should care about what you do to the Earth. And this is obviously it is not an animate object. So A is immaterial. There is a direct cause-effect relationship between human activities and global climate change. The author agrees with that. This is how the global climate change has occurred because of us, by humans, because of the way humans exploited Earth. So this is not going to weaken the author's view or the reviewer's view. It is in line with the reviewer's view. So B is also incorrect. Ghosh's book has a different title, The Nutmeg's Revenge. Now, even if you say revenge, okay, revenge is also taken by a person. So still you're personifying, whether it is a curse or a revenge, you're still personifying Earth. Ghosh is still personifying Earth. And the reviewer is also right in personifying Earth, because the point is that you want to show that this should be cared for, this should be respected. So this is a conscious choice. So even if you put revenge, it doesn't weaken. If you said the nutmegs, something which cannot be done by a human or need not be done by a human, then you would be weakening the point. But this doesn't weaken the point, because even revenge is taken by humans only. So C is also incorrect. Non-European societies have perceived the Earth as a non-living source of all resources. Now, if even non-European sources actually looked at it as an inanimate object, not as Earth Mother or not as a person, but as an inanimate object, then the author's point is rubbish, right? Because everybody looked at it as an inanimate object, the Europeans as well as the non-Europeans. Then why are you calling it who? Why are you saying that it is giving a curse? The point only makes sense if other people other than the Europeans actually looked at Earth as a person who had to be taken care of, who you had to have a good relationship with. So if D is true, the author's point is moot. So D is the right answer. All of the following can be inferred from the reviewer's discussion of the Nutmeg's curse, except the history of climate change is deeply intertwined with the history of colonialism. Yes, the author in fact asserts that it started with the spread of European colonialism. So A is true. The contemporary dominant perception of nature and environment was put in place by the processes of colonialism. Again true, Earlier, we had a better relationship with Earth. The mindset that I have to exploit everything from Earth was spread by European colonialism. This is the European colonialist view of Earth. So this is also true. Environmental preservation policy makers can learn a lot from non-European or pre-colonial societies. This is also true. The current policy makers are just providing lip service for the current policies. They are calling it Earth Mother and all, but they have not really adopted the mindset that Earth is a person that has to be protected and cared for. So this is also true. The author will definitely agree with, and it is in line with the author's discussion, that those people actually had a better mindset than even the policy makers today. So C is also correct. Academic discourses have always served the function of raising awareness about environmental preservation. Now, academic discourses and what purpose they serve has not been discussed at all. So this cannot be inferred. What the academic sources have actually said, we cannot infer from any part of the passage. Some might have actually raised awareness about environmental preservation. Some might have actually helped environmental degradation. So we do not know what academic discourses did, because that is not part of the current this. In fact, if you see, the author actually says that the way the European colonialists looked at nature has been part of many domains, including physics, chemistry, biology, which are academic courses. Economics, politics, anthropology, philosophy are also academic discourses. So in many ways, the European mindset or European colonialist mindset was also propagated by the academic discourses, and those academic discourses or that mindset was actually harmful. So D actually, if I can infer it to be false according to the passage. So D is the right answer. Which one of the following best explains the primary purpose of the discussion of the colonization of Banda Islands in the Nutmeg curse? So the Banda Islands give two reasons why those are discussed. First is that it was a way of killing the indigenous understanding and relationship with nature, and the second was that it was a way of attacking Earth itself. You are not only colonizing the people, but you are colonizing the Earth as a resource to be exploited. So that basically showed that this was the start of the way in which Earth was systematically exploited as such. The mindset was put into play by these kind of acts as such. So let's take a look at the options. To illustrate the role played by cultivation of certain crops in plantation mode in contributing to climate change. It is not about that specific crop or not even just about plantation. The issue is about that mindset, the mindset that I have to draw everything that I can. I have to exploit this inert asset as much as I can. So that mindset that is the one that the author says that that is why he actually puts that example to showcase that the mindset as well as the killing of the indigenous understanding are the two reasons why that particular example was given. So A is not capturing either, so A can be eliminated. To illustrate the first instance in history when the processes responsible for climate change were initiated. No, it is not even the first instance in history. They say that it started with 15th century and this was the 1621 massacre. So it was not the first instance, but he starts the book with that instance. But he is not saying that that is the first instance in which the process responsible for the climate change was started. It started in the 15th century sometime. So B is incorrect. To illustrate how systemic violence against the colonized constituted the cornerstone of colonialism, the violence against the colonized is definitely wrong, but that was not the point. The point was how the violence contributed to the killing of the indigenous understanding of how to treat nature. The example is given to basically highlight how the old understanding of how to treat nature was killed and how a exploitative understanding was put in its place. So it was not about the killing itself, but what that killing caused. That killing caused the knowledge was lost, the understanding was lost. That is basically that is the point being made. So C is incorrect. To illustrate how colonialism represented and perpetuated the mindset that has led to climate change. This is exactly the point, that the old understanding, the old mindset was killed. It was killed by the colonizers and a new mindset was put in, which is I have to exploit Earth as much as possible. So this is exactly the reason why that example is given. So D is the correct answer.
Google search Cracku CAT formulas PDF. Click on the first link. You will get a list of topics for CAT. Click on one of the topics. Download the PDF to get a list of formulas for the topic.
Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular para insertion question, we are given the following statement. beyond undermining the monopoly of the state on the use of force, armed conflict also creates an environment that can enable organized crime to prosper. So let's take a look at the paragraph first. Linkages between illicit arms, organized crime and armed conflict can reinforce one another while also escalating the prolonging violence and eroding governance. Financial gains from crime can lengthen or intensify armed conflicts by creating revenue streams for non-state armed groups, NSAGs. In this context, when hostilities cease and parties to a conflict move towards a peaceful resolution, the widespread availability of surplus arms and ammunition can contribute to a situation of criminalized peace that obstructs sustainable peace-building efforts. So here what we are being told is that when you have armed conflicts, the presence of armed conflicts, essentially there is a link between illicit arms, organized crime and armed conflicts. They kind of feed off each other. So basically the first sentence is that there is these links between illicit arms, organized crime and armed conflicts, and then we are told how organized crime essentially intensifies or feeds into armed conflict. The other idea would be armed conflict, how it actually helps organized crime. And if you take a look at it, this paragraph tells you till here, tells you about how these are kind of a like a feedback loop which helps each other, and when that is the case, peace becomes very difficult. This part tells you what happens when peace building efforts are there. This loop becomes very, very difficult to break as such. It essentially, even when the loop is broken, when armed conflict cease, the presence of the arms essentially creates a nuisance later on. So this part is essentially talking about the feedback loop, which essentially self-reinforcing loop, armed conflicts helping the organized crime helping armed conflicts. This part tells you the consequence of it. If you see our sentence, it talks about how the armed conflicts also helps organized crime. First part is how organized crime helps armed conflicts. This sentence tells you how armed conflict helps organized crime. So this sentence essentially is in this part. It should be over here, which tells you about this feedback loop, how armed conflict helps organized crime helps armed conflict. So over here, firstly this line should be there, which essentially tells you that these two are linked and they help each other. So this given sentence cannot fit in 1. Firstly, it cannot fit in 4 because we have identified it should be in this part. So that basically means it should be between 2 and 3. Now, financial gains from crimes basically tells you that it supports like organized crime supports armed conflict. This one tells you that armed conflict supports organized crime. So essentially either statement can go first or the other statement can go, because both are showing how these two are essentially helping each other. The only difference that I can see is that here this sentence starts with beyond undermining the monopoly of the state. Armed conflict also creates an environment that can enable organized crime to prosper. So basically when you say that this part essentially is adding on to an earlier part as such, it is adding on to it's like an additional point. So when you say an additional point, it should come before another point is made. So that would basically mean that this point is made first, and then this is the additional point that is being made. So this sentence should come after financial gain sentence, which means that 3 is the correct place for it. So that means that the correct option to choose is option B. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this para insertion question, the sentence that is given to us is, for theoretical purposes, arguments may be considered as freestanding entities abstracted from their context of use in actual human activities. The actual paragraph is, an argument can be defined as a complex symbolic structure where some parts, known as the premises, offer support to another part, the conclusion. Alternatively, an argument can be viewed as a complex speech act consisting of one or more acts of premising, which assert propositions in favor of the conclusion, an act of concluding, and a stated or implicit marker. Hence, therefore, that indicates that the conclusion follows from the premises. So this part is a description or definition of an argument. The relation of support between premises and conclusion can be cashed out in different ways. The premises may guarantee the truth of the conclusion or make its truth more probable. The premises may imply the conclusion, the premises may make the conclusion more acceptable or assertable. So the relationship between premise and conclusion is mentioned over here. So this is relation between premise and conclusion. The last part is, but depending on one's explanatory goals, there is also much to be gained from considering arguments as they in fact occur in human communicative practices. So here, like a contradictory point of view is given. that you should actually consider arguments as they occur in natural life or real life, in normal human communication as such. But what it is contradicting is not really clear as now. See, the given sentence tells you that for theoretical purposes, arguments may be considered as freestanding entities abstracted from the context in use in actual human activities. So it is telling about where they can be used. You can consider them as freestanding. In theoretical, you can consider them as not having any context as such, but you should actually consider them in human context. So this is talking about a specific example where arguments should be considered, how they should be considered. So this should come after you give the definition of an argument. First you will define what is an argument, then you will tell that, okay, given this definition, this is true about arguments. So definitely the definition should come first, which means that this sentence cannot fit in one. Now if you take a look at 2, 3, 4, essentially there is a clear jump between this sentence which ends over here and this sentence which ends over here. This sentence tells that, but depending on one's explanatory goals, there is so much to be gained from considering arguments as they in fact occur in human communicative practices, as in how they occur in human real life, in human communication. So when you say but, it has to contradict something else. What does it contradict? Does it contradict the sentence before? Because this part is entirely about the relationship between premise and conclusion. It does not say anything about how or where arguments should be used or in what context they should be used. This has nothing to do with the context in which arguments have to be used, which means that this given sentence does not fit over here. This given sentence should not be over here because we need it before this sentence to essentially contrast with this sentence. The given sentence says that, okay, they can be considered in purely theoretical way, you can consider it in an abstract context as such, but it makes much more sense to consider it in normal human conversations as such. So this sentence contradicts or contrasts with this sentence. So this sentence should come just before it, which means that 3 should be our answer. So the correct answer or the correct option is option D. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular OOC para jumble question, we are given the following sentences. Boa Senior, who lived through the 2004 tsunami, the Japanese occupation and diseases brought by British settlers, was the last native of the island chain who was fluent in Bo. The indigenous population has been steadily collapsing since the island chain was colonized by British settlers in 1858 and used for most of the following 100 years as a colonial penal colony. Taking its name from a now extinct tribe, Bo is one of the 10 great Andamanese languages, which are thought to date back to pre-Neolithic human settlement of Southeast Asia. The last speaker of an ancient tribal language has died in the Andaman Islands, breaking a 65,000-year link to one of the world's oldest cultures. Though the language has been closely studied by researchers of linguistic history, Boa Senior spent the last few years of her life unable to converse with anyone in her mother tongue. So essentially, what is the entire paragraph about? The paragraph is that the last speaker of the Bo language has died and it's a news item about it. Firstly, we'll introduce, whenever you're writing a news item, you have to introduce what news has happened. So what is the news that has happened? The last speaker of the Bo language has died. So that has been introduced in 4. The last speaker has died. Now this is introducing the last speaker and she is referenced over here, Boa Senior and Boa Senior, who is the last speaker as such. So over here we are, this sentence which introduces that the last speaker has died has to be then followed by a line which tells you about the fact about who the last speaker was. So it can be either 1 or 5 as such. If you take a look at the sentence 2, it talks about how population has been collapsing. 3 talks about the name or it taking its name from the now extinct tribe. Bo is one of the great languages. So when I say this, I have to essentially have introduced Bo at least before, and then I should then say that, okay, taking its name from one of the now extinct tribe, Bo is a great Andamanese language. So this sentence 3 has to come after another sentence which essentially introduces Bo as such. So is there any other sentence which introduces Bo? 1 introduces Bo, she was fluent in Bo, and though the language has been closely studied, she was the last few years unable to speak in her mother tongue. So since Bo is not mentioned over here, we cannot use 5 as a precursor to 3. The only precursor to 3 essentially in that entire paragraph is 1 as such. Only 1 can actually precede 3 because in this Boa Senior is given who Boa Senior was and she was speaking the last native of the island who was fluent in Bo, and this is then added in 3 you add to that by saying that taking its name from the now extinct tribe. Bo is one of the 10 great Andamanese language which was dating back to the prehistoric pre-Neolithic human settlement. So 1, 3 essentially forms a pair. 1 tells you that this was She was fluent. Boa Senior was fluent in Bo. Bo is one of the 10 great Andamanese languages. Now, essentially, Boa Senior was the last person who was speaking Bo. This is introduced in 4. But 4, after 4, essentially, we can either put 1, 3, or we can put the fact that Boa Senior is also mentioned over here. So, we can either put 1, 3, or we can put 5. So, we know that 4 can be either be followed by 1 or 5, because we have to essentially talk about Boa Senior just after 4. But if you put 5 over here, 5 starts with though the language has been closely studied. So this essentially is in continuation with 1-3, which talks about the Bo language. So 5 should come after 1-3 as such. So 1-3 tell you about how the language was, what it derives its name from. Boa Senior was the last person speaking that language, what it derives its name from. And 5 then tells you that in her final year, she was not able to speak to anybody else because there was nobody else who was remaining who spoke Bo. So 1, 3, 5 essentially becomes a block. 4 introduces the topic, 1, 3, 5 together tell you how the language disappeared as such. So this can be eliminated. The order of the sentences to form a coherent paragraph becomes 4, 1, 3, 5. 2, which talks about the population collapse, is not at all related to the topic of how the Bo language went extinct, how Boa Senior was the last person who spoke the language, how though it was studied, there was nobody else who really spoke it. So all the other sentences speak about the extinction of the language. 2 talks about the general population demographics of the island, which is not related to the extinction of the language as such. So 2 is the odd one out. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Sayali Kale. In this OOC para jumble, we are given the following 5 sentences. The first sentence is, although hard skills have traditionally ruled the roost, some companies are moving away from the choosing prospective hires based on technical abilities alone. Companies are shaking off the old definition of an ideal candidate and ditching the idea of looking for a singularly perfect candidate altogether. Now, some job descriptions are frequently asking for candidates to demonstrate soft skills such as leadership or teamwork. That's not to say that practical know-how is no longer required. Some jobs still call for highly specific expertise. The move towards prioritizing soft skills is a natural response to 3 years of pandemic, says a senior recruiter at Sennar FSP. So if you take a look at the sentences, many sentences are talking about how technical skills are required while recruiting, as well as some soft skills are also being required. We see the first introduction to this topic is in 1. We see a link between 1 and 3. So although hard skills have traditionally ruled the roost, now what is the case? Now we are seeing that candidates have to demonstrate soft skills. So earlier condition is given, current condition is given, and therefore these 2 sentences are linked and should come in this order as such. Now 4 is essentially saying that's not to say. So it is saying that it is clarifying that it's not that the harder skill or the technical skills are no longer asked for. Many jobs require very specific technical skills, but soft skills are also given a lot of importance nowadays. So 4 is essentially clarifying what is there in 3. So 1, 3, 4 forms a combination. It forms a group as such. So 1, 3, 4 are definitely part of the paragraph. So 2 and 5 are, one of these 2 is not part of the paragraph. Take a look at 2. 2 talks about companies are shaking off the old definition of an ideal candidate. Could be ideal candidate is no longer somebody who is the most good at the specific skill, but also has soft skills. Okay, maybe. And ditching the idea of looking for a singularly perfect candidate altogether. Singularly perfect candidate that is not in any way related to the idea of soft skills are also important. Singularly perfect candidate means that instead of looking for one perfect candidate, you are looking for multiple candidates, or possibly a candidate which does only one part of the task as such, which has nothing to do with the remaining sentences. So 2 essentially introduces a tangential idea. It goes on a tangential idea of how there might not be one perfect candidate, but multiple candidates who together represent a perfect candidate as such. So 2's idea is actually not in line with what is there in 1, 3, 4. Let's take a look at 5 instead. The move towards prioritizing soft skills is a natural response to 3 years of pandemic, says a senior recruiter at Sennar FSP. So 5 explains 1, 3, 4. Now 5 explains what is the reason behind it. Now soft skills are super important because of the pandemic. People didn't have any face-to-face time. Now soft skills have become very important. So 5 essentially continues with what 1, 3, 4 has said. So the order should be 1, 3, 4, 5. These are part of the same paragraph. 2, which talks about a tangential idea, is the odd one out. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular para-jumble question, we are given the following sentences. Centuries later, formal learning is still mostly based on reading, even with the widespread use of other possible education affecting technologies such as film, radio and television. One of the immediate and recognizable impacts of the printing press was how people learned. In the scribal culture, it primarily involved listening, so memorization was paramount. The transformation of learners from listeners to readers was a complex social and cultural phenomenon, and it was not until the industrial era that the concept of universal literacy took root. The printing press shifted the learning process as listening and memorization gradually gave way to reading and learning. It no longer required the presence of a mentor, it could be done privately. So if you can see all the sentences, it is talking about a shift. What is this shift? It is the shift from the scribal culture to the reading culture. So what is the scribal culture? That is basically one person tells you, it's oral history, somebody tells you who is the mentor will teach you, like you had the Guru Shishya Parampara, one tells you, the other person listens and memorizes as such, and it requires a mentor. This is the kind of teaching we had before the printing presses were there. There would be somebody who would be speaking, the other person would be listening, and that is how knowledge transfer took place. So in this kind of scribal culture, it involved listening, so memorization was paramount because you had to memorize everything that you heard as such. So this is the older culture, and this required a mentor as such. What happened when the printing press shifted to the learning process? So once the printing press came and once you had books, what happened is that you no longer needed a guru or somebody to teach you. You no longer needed a mentor, you could read books. So this led to a shift to a reading culture. The reading culture was that instead of learning and memorization and listening and memorization, you were like learning to read and learn, and without you do not need a mentor, you could do it it could be done by an individual privately as such. So this shift is essentially being mentioned. So if I see 2 and 4, 2 tells you the scribal culture, how the scribal culture was, and 4 tells you the new reading culture that happened after the invention of the printing press. So 2, 4 together tell you about the shift as such. Let's take a look at 1 and 3. 1 tells you what is the case centuries later. So this, if you consider chronologically, you should essentially put centuries later at the very end, because chronologically what was the shift would be mentioned, and then what is the case now? The case now, centuries later, formal learning is still mostly based on reading. So this shift that took place is still in place as such. We still have a reading culture because formal learning is still reading based. So 1 essentially tells you the now point, this is the past, this is the past. Okay, let's take a look at 3 as such. The transformation of learners from listeners to readers was a complex social and cultural phenomenon, and it was not until the industrial era that the concept of universal literacy took root. So here you have essentially what happened. So this shift happened, okay, but this concept of literacy took root really in the industrial era, when there was a concept of universal literacy. So essentially anybody and everybody should be able to read essentially took place in the industrial era. So this is essentially after 2-4. This shift happened chronologically. Chronologically, after that, the industrial era happened, where you had the idea take firm root, and then after that, what is the current situation is given in 1. So this is what happens now. 2 and 4 are what happened at the very start in the past. 3 is the midpoint as such, that this idea really took root in the industrial era, and now what is the case? So the order of the sentences should be 2, 4, 3, 1. This is mostly chronological. So if you understand the chronology of actions that are taking place, it is very easy for you to then unscramble the sentences. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular para-jumble question, we have the following 4 sentences. Veena Sahajwala, a material scientist at the University of New South Wales, believes there is a new way of solving this problem. Her vision is for automated drones and robots to pick out components, put them into a small furnace and smelt them at specific temperatures to extract the metals one by one before they are sent off to manufacturers for reuse. E-waste contains huge quantities of valuable metals, ceramics and plastics that could be salvaged and recycled, although currently not enough of it is. She plans to build micro factories that can tease apart the tangle of materials in mobile phones, computers and other e-waste. So essentially this paragraph is about how e-waste is not being reused properly, and one woman has a vision of how to actually reuse or essentially recycle the parts of e-waste as such. So firstly, before you actually introduce Veena, We have to essentially first pose the problem that Veena has actually found a solution to. So Veena believes there's a new way of solving this problem. So first we have to put what the problem is. The problem is mentioned in 3. So 3 is the opening sentence. 3 gives you the problem. All, if you see 1, 2 and 4, they refer to Veena. So they should come after Veena has been introduced in 1. So 1 should be there, where Veena has found a, is posing a solution to the problem. So 3 tells you the problem, Veena is proposing a solution to the problem, and 2 and 4 refer to she and her. So basically it is referring to Veena, so they should definitely come after 1 as such. So therefore 3, 1 should be at the start and 2 and 4 in some order should be at the end. So the order can be 3, 1, 2, 4 or 3, 1, 4, 2. 2, 4 and 4, 2 are basically, they are giving the order in which things have to be done. So in what order will you do? So first you will actually have to establish the micro factories. In those micro factories you will have to essentially separate the mobile phones, computers and other e-waste. Once you have teased apart the tangle, then you will have automated drones and robots that pick out those components and smelt them at the specific temperatures. So if you just consider the process, what should come first in the process, what should come second in the process? 4 should come first in the process, where you pick apart the components, where you tease apart the tangle of materials as such. So essentially it is telling you what is going to happen. You separate the items, then the drones will pick those components and then smelt them at specific temperatures, and it also gives you the very end of the process. The very end of the process is that you ship it off to the manufacturers. This is the biggest clue that you have to use. Sent off to manufacturers for reuse means that's the end of the process. Because it is the end of the process, 2 should come after 4. So the order should be 3, 1, 4, 2 and not 3, 1, 2, 4. So the correct answer is 3, 1, 4, 2. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. Let us consider the given para summary question. The weight of society's expectations is hardly a new phenomenon, but it has become particularly draining over the recent decades, perhaps because expectations themselves are so multifarious and contradictory. So basically says that society's expectations are nothing new, but they have become so much more of a burden because there are so many expectations. When you have so many expectations, they become an especial burden as such, like a heavy burden. The perfectionism of the 1950s was rooted in the norms of mass culture and captured in famous advertising images of the ideal white American family that now seems self-satirizing. In that era, perfectionism meant seamlessly conforming to values, behavior and appearance, chiseled confidence for men, demure graciousness for women. The perfectionist was under pressure to look like everyone else, only more so. The perfectionists of today, by contrast, feel an obligation to stand out through their idiosyncratic style and wit if they are to gain a foothold in the attention economy. So basically, a point being made over here is that we have a heavy burden of society's expectation. Earlier, and essentially why is this a heavy burden? Because it is varied and contradictory. Now, why is it talking about contradictory? So, it tells you a contradiction as such. So, what is the contradiction? Earlier, in the 1950s or so, the expectation was of perfectionism. So, expectation was of perfectionism and conformism. You should look exactly like everybody else. Every family should look exactly like this. And you are a perfectionist based on how much you conform to that ideal as such. So, earlier expectation was perfectionism and conformism. Now, in fact, the expectation is reverse. The expectation is that you should be a non-conformist. So, new expectation is like a 180-degree turn on the earlier expectation. Now, you should stand out. You should be idiosyncratic, meaning that you should have characteristics that are not there in anybody else. You should stand out by your wit. You should not conform. So, now it is like you should be non-conformist and you should stand out in the attention economy. So, what is attention economy? That there is very little attention to give, and for people to actually notice you, there should be something different about you. Only then people will notice you. Here you are required to be same as everyone else. Now you have to actually stand out, be different. So, this is basically what he says is contradictory. Earlier the expectation was one, now there is a 180-degree turn in the expectation as such, and this is essentially what puts a heavy burden on you. How do you actually suddenly try to stand out? And this is like the society's expectation of an individual, which is a heavy burden on the individual. So now that we understand what the paragraph is about, Let's take a look at the options. Option A says that the image of perfectionism is reflected in and perpetuated by the media, and people do their best to adhere to these ideals. This is missing on the entire part of how earlier it was a idea of conformism, that you had to look exactly like everybody else, and now it is actually of non-conformism, that you have to actually stand out in the attention economy. Since that part is missing, A can be eliminated. Though long-standing, the pressure to appear perfect and thereby attract attention has evolved over time from one of conformism to one of non-conformism. This is exactly capturing the idea that earlier you were required to look like this ideal, and now with the attention economy you have to actually stand out, you have to be idiosyncratic, and this change is being captured in option B. So option B is the right answer. Let's take a look at option C and D as well. The pressure to appear perfect has been the cause of tension and conflict because the idea itself has been in a state of flux and hard to define. See, this is a state of flux is true, but it is not a state of flux. It is not like constantly changing. It has changed from A to B. So this is a bit of an exaggeration as such. And this part that it has caused tension and conflict, where is that given? It has been told that it is draining, it is a burden. But conflict, where is conflict coming from? So C can be eliminated. The desire to attract attention is so deep rooted in individual consciousness that people are willing to go to any lengths to achieve it. This idea that it is so deep rooted that people are willing to go to any lengths, this part is completely outside the scope of the paragraph. So D also can be eliminated. B is the right answer. Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. In this particular para summary question, this is a difficult para summary question, and I will tell you why. First, let's take a look at the paragraph. The paragraph says that gradually life for the island's birds is improving. Antarctic prions and white-headed pestrels, which also nest in burrows, had managed to cling on in some sites while pests were on the island. Their numbers are now increasing. It's fantastic and so exciting, Shaw says. As birds return to breed, they also poo. This adds to the nutrients to the soil, which in turn helps the plants to grow back stronger. Tall plants help burrowing birds hide from predatory skuas. It is a wonderful feedback loop, Shaw says. Today, the pretty paddock that Houghton first experienced has been transformed. The tussock is over your head and you're dodging all these penguin tunnels, she says. The orchid and tiny herb that had been protected by fencing have started turning up all over the place. So first, let us understand the paragraph completely, and I'll tell you why this particular para summary is difficult. If you take a look at the options, each option feels as if it is introducing new information. So I'll actually let us go nicely through the paragraph, understand it completely, and then take a look at the options. So firstly, what the paragraph is saying, that life is life for the island's birds is improving. So the bird life is improving. Why is the bird life improving? So somehow these birds had been able to cling on to life while the pests had invaded the island. So were on the island meaning that the pests are no longer on the island, and now that the pests are gone, what has happened? The birds have come back in full flow. So because the pests are gone, the numbers of the birds are increasing, and there is a positive feedback loop. As the number of birds increases, they poop, and their poop is actually good for the plants, and the plants are also increasing, and as the plants increase, they provide shelter to the birds. So essentially, birds increase, plants grow stronger, birds increase. So there is a feedback loop in place. So this is the main idea that is being mentioned. This is essentially a description of what has been told earlier. So when you say the pretty paddock that Houghton first experienced, pretty paddock basically means there was a small growth kind of area where it was not very tall plants or anything of that sort. Now the Houghton says that the tussock is over your head, so the plants have grown very tall as such, and there are tunnels, bird tunnels everywhere as such, penguin tunnels everywhere, and basically the earlier you had to protect the herbs and the orchids with fencing to prevent them from being removed or being taken down by the pests. Now they are growing wild. So basically the plants and the bird population has increased quite a bit as such, and this is because the pests have left the island. They were on the island, and now that they have left the island, everything has grown quite a bit. Now essentially the only thing that is not very clearly given is that from this were on the island, you have to infer quite a bit of information. If you are able to zone in that were on the island, then you will be able to identify the correct option. If you are not able to identify the implication of that word, then you will not be able to understand the correct option. So now that we understand the paragraph, let's take a look at the options. There is an increasing number of predatory birds and plants on the island despite the presence of pests, which is a positive development. This part is true. Increasing number of not predatory birds, birds on the island and plants on the island. So this is a distortion. Despite the presence of pests, till this part is correct, but the presence of pests is incorrect. They were on the island, the pests are not there on the island anymore. So this is untrue. In the absence of pests, life on the island is now protected. There has been a revival of a variety of birds and plants. So this is exactly the point being made. Now that the pests are gone, everything is flowering and it is supporting each other. So I would say this is the right answer. Flowering plants, herbs and birds are now being protected on this wonderful Antarctic islands. So it is not that it is now being protected. It is kind of earlier the orchids and the herbs had to be fenced in. They had to be protected. Now they are growing wild, which means that they are growing on their own. The life number of birds are increasing on their own. It is now kind of in a positive increasing loop as such. It is not because of protection, it is just basically that bird life and plant life has essentially recuperated, and that point is missing, so C is incorrect. There is a huge positive transformation of the ecosystem of the island when brought under environmental protection. It is not about environmental protection, it is basically that the pests are gone. This kind of, there is a resurgence of bird life and plant life, and the point that there is a resurgence of bird life and plant life is missing in option D. The very important part is missing in option D. So option B is the right answer.
We at Cracku provide all the previous year CAT papers along with many other MBA examinations such as ZAT, SNAP, MAT, CMAT, TIS and PGDBA in the actual exam format. You can attempt them as a test and get a detailed analysis of your performance or download them as PDFs.